As unfortunate as it might seem, trusting people these days is quite difficult, especially when you've been deceived before. The hardest part is that it's impossible to predict whether someone will betray you or not. It's simply a matter of chance if they don't betray you. Unfortunately, I was not lucky as my wife was unfaithful, but fate dealt with her harshly a few years later. He was sitting on a stool at the far end of the bar, his back against the wall, his gaze fixed on a baseball game shown on one of the TVs above. Despite his height of 6'8" and a weight of about 190 lbs, he looked less imposing compared to my own size of 6'8" and 255 lbs. Nevertheless, I approached him with caution, aware of what he might be capable of. I hoped he would listen to me without turning aggressive. "Are you Jack Wilson?" I asked as I moved toward him. He nodded, and I proceeded. "Can I buy you a drink? Who are you?" "I don't know you, and I don't need another drink. I'm waiting for my wife," he replied. "I'm Steve, but that's not important." "You need to know what's been going on with Julie while you were gone on your sales trip," I explained, trying to pique his curiosity rather than provoke him. "My sales trip? How did you know I was on a sales trip, and how do you know my wife's name?" his voice was tinged with irritation. I faltered, searching for the right words. The situation was delicate and could quickly worsen. "Oh hell, there's no gentle way to say this, Jack. I know your wife's name because I spent most of the night with her at my place." That's when the fight started. It wasn't much of a fight. He hit me, and I ended up on the floor. Despite his smaller size, he hit hard. It all occurred so swiftly that I didn't feel the impact until I was sitting on the bar floor. He leaned over me, insisting I stand up, so he could hit me again. I stayed seated, looking up at him, considering my next move. I might have earned his wrath, but I refused to be his punching bag. Why admit to an affair with his wife? It was all about revenge. My name is Stephen Harrow, and although I wouldn't describe myself as a complete fool, lately I've felt like one. Only someone unaware or distracted, and sadly I was both, would have failed to see the betrayal unfolding. I remained oblivious until the cliched situation revealed itself. I unexpectedly saw my wife where she shouldn't have been. She said she was comforting her sister, who had just ended an engagement and needed support. During a work call, my wife told me about her visit to her sister's and that she might be home late. Ignoring the wholesome tuna casserole in the fridge, I opted for a beer and a burger at a recommended place, which was about 10 miles from my office in the opposite direction of our home. As soon as I entered, it didn't take long to spot them together. The person she was with in a secluded booth at the back of the bar didn't resemble her sister at all, although they did have some similar features, if you understand what I mean. Furthermore, I had never seen my wife engage in such passionate kissing as she did with this man. It was an intense and intimate exchange. To be honest, I wasn't completely surprised. I guess I had been expecting something like this for the past 3 months. My future wife, Stella Rogers, and I met in high school, went on a few dates, and eventually went to different colleges. Our relationship wasn't deep, and there were no emotional farewells. We simply enjoyed each other's company and moved on. Stella wasn't the most traditionally beautiful girl at school. In fact, she looked quite ordinary. She wore glasses, still had some baby fat, and lacked any real style or sense of fashion. Although she wasn't striking in appearance, she compensated greatly with her sharp mind, witty satire, and impressive dance moves. On the dance floor, Stella transformed and outshone us all. We were a perfect match. Though I wasn't much to look at, tall, skinny, and clumsy, with more than my fair share of acne, you might have found my picture under geek in the dictionary. Together, though, we complemented each other well. Nearly 6 years later, I ran into her again. I was taking some postgraduate classes and decided to unwind at a bar not far from campus, a place I didn't often frequent. The bar was usually buzzing with conversation, but then a hush fell over the room. Lost in thought over a beer, I pondered how I had managed to keep my cool in a class where the professor's views were so far left. They nearly aligned with Karl Marx, while I leaned a bit right, akin to John Wayne. The quiet made me look up, and that's when I saw Stella. At first, I didn't recognize her. It wasn't until she smiled and laughed that I realized it was her. Wow, she had changed significantly, and definitely for the better. Stella had become strikingly beautiful. Her glasses were gone, along with any trace of baby fat. The awkward girl, once unsure of her style, had disappeared. In her place stood a radiant woman, dressed impeccably, with long legs and a sculpted figure that could rival a marble statue. Her long blonde hair flowed perfectly around a beautifully made-up face. She was the type of woman who drew everyone's gaze, so stunning that even other women couldn't help but admire her. I laughed to myself, thinking of how I had let her slip away in high school, and recognized that even if we had stayed together, things would be different now. Like her, I had changed. I had grown more muscular due to better nutrition and playing college football, which also improved my coordination and helped clear up my acne. As I prepared to leave the bar, I heard a sweet, familiar voice calling my name. There was Stella, standing in front of me. "Hey, boyfriend, it's been what, about 6 years," she greeted, leaning in to kiss my cheek as she stood on her tiptoes. "Hi, Stella. Good to see you," I replied, after collecting myself. For a moment, I felt the envy of every guy there. "Come join us for a drink, we've got a lot of catching up to do," she suggested, pulling me by the hand towards her group. "Hey guys, grab another table so Steve can join us," she instructed as 3 or 4 people quickly moved to accommodate us. It was ironic the girl I once knew was so shy she hardly spoke to anyone but me, and now here she was, giving orders with confidence. Stella had definitely changed. One of the guys asked about our drink preferences and when to get them. I couldn't help but think how handy it must be to have such attentive friends. As Stella and I chatted for several minutes, catching up on the last 6 years and updating each other on our lives, I felt it was time to address the obvious. I knew Stella was expecting it, and I couldn't hold back. "Wow, Stella, you look fantastic. I almost didn't recognize you. You're so different from high school," I remarked, admiring this charming person. "Yep, I've changed, and it's all thanks to you, Steve," she replied, her amusement clear by the puzzled look on my face. "Me? What do you mean?" "I didn't do anything," I responded, intrigued by her comment. She chuckled, then burst into laughter. Normally, I wouldn't find a 23 or 24-year-old woman giggling appealing. She should have outgrown that phase. However, in Stella's case, it was charming and captivating, making me eager to hear more. I watched her, waiting for an explanation of how I had influenced her change. Stella then clarified why she considered me responsible, or more precisely, credited me with her personal development. She shared that when we parted ways after high school, she was heartbroken. She thought that her looks, her personality, and her timidity had driven me away, or at least that's how she perceived it. I was about to question her assertions, but she gestured for silence before I could speak. We had never really talked about love or commitment, but that didn't alter my feelings. With us heading to different colleges, it seemed inevitable that we would part ways. I didn't want to rationalize or dwell on the reasons for our breakup. I just believed that if I had been prettier, slimmer, and more refined, you wouldn't have left me, she explained, punctuating her statement with a laugh that might have once been a giggle. That's not why I tried to interject, but she stopped me again. I know it wasn't true, but that's how I felt back then. "So I decided to change myself into someone you would desire," she said. She dubbed her effort project Stella during college. She adopted a healthier diet, began exercising regularly, hit the gym almost every day, started running 3 times a week, working up to a 5K, and joined the drama club to shed her shyness. Stella paused to finish her drink, lifting her empty glass and waiting for an assistant to bring another. I even took a beauty course at a technical college to learn makeup and hairstyling techniques. Then I immersed myself in grooming and fashion literature. By my junior year, my transformation was almost complete. She still needed to apply what she'd learned practically. I began flirting and mingling with some of the men in my classes to overcome my introversion, she said, pausing before continuing. "Stella, I had no idea you felt that way in high school," I interjected. "You have to understand, I was as much of a geek as you felt you were. I was drawn to you not for your looks, but because you were intriguing." After a pause, I added, "There was another reason I asked you out, though." "What was it?" she queried. "You were the only girl who ever said yes when I asked for a date. Initially, that was the main reason, but by the 3rd date, I genuinely wanted to be with you because of you. We just clicked. I regretted saying goodbye, but at 18, I hadn't thought much beyond college. I never expected or even imagined that a casual conversation with an old friend would lead to such heartfelt confessions. Stella greeted me warmly, grasping my hand with both of hers and leaning against me briefly. You must have men falling all over themselves to be with you, looking as good as you do and as confident as you appear, I remarked, grinning widely. No, there's no one special, Steve. I've had 2 serious relationships since college, but something was always missing, so we ended things, she replied. I gestured toward the others at the table, silently asking and leaning in for privacy. Stella whispered, these people are just acquaintances, or not even that, more like companions. Kyle over there fetching drinks has asked me out at least a dozen times. I enjoy the attention. So instead of rejecting him outright, I smile and say maybe, and he keeps pursuing. 2 of the 3 girls I'm helping to reinvent themselves have ended up dating some of my former boyfriends. She chuckled again at my expression. Come on. You know that less attractive girls often hang out with a beautiful girl not just for friendship, but to get closer to guys they might not otherwise meet. It's not the most flattering reason, is it? I was surprised by her bluntness. It shows they're clever enough to grab an opportunity, she answered. And regarding the other 2, they're a couple now. I used to date Brad, but after we split, Sherry started seeing him. They seem content, which is a good result. Sherry's like one of my success stories. I couldn't help but frown at the change in her attitude. The girl I once knew was shy, lacked confidence, and was introverted, except with me. The new Stella was brimming with confidence, almost to the point of being arrogant or overly proud. Personally, I missed the old Stella. Well, I guess I should head out, got classes in the morning and all that. It's been, well, interesting is the word, seeing you again, Stella. Best of luck with your projects, I said as I stood up to leave. She stood too, hugged me, and kissed my cheek. It wasn't a distant hug, the kind where they touch you but keep their body away. This was a real hug meant to show affection, and let me tell you, Stella felt amazing. As she handed me a card, she said, "Here are my home and cell numbers. Give me a call and we can talk more." It felt almost like a command Queen Stella the First had spoken. Again, I was taken aback by how much she had changed in just under 2 hours with this new Stella. I wasn't impressed. Sure, her looks and confidence were enhanced, but she seemed to have lost the sweetness, kindness, and thoughtfulness she once possessed. It didn't seem like a fair exchange to me. Giving the card back to Stella, I remarked, "There's no need for more conversation. We've already revisited our past. Since then, you've moved on and clearly don't need another person in your circle. I'm glad to see you're doing well, Stella." Goodbye. Without waiting for her to respond or argue, I walked away, having had enough of Her Majesty for now. As I approached the door, I heard Kyle's voice. "How dare he talk to you like that? Should I go get him and make him apologize?" Stella laughed heartily after that. "Do you really think you could make him do anything he didn't want to? Just look at his size, you fool." Part of me wished Kyle had tried to drag me back. It would have been amusing, and I was slightly annoyed. I longed for someone to share that sentiment with. I was disheartened by how my high school friend had become so self-centered after we went to different colleges. Stella often crossed my mind during my first Christmas break. From college, I returned home hoping to reconnect with her, only to find out her parents had moved. Despite my attempts to get her new address from her college, I was unsuccessful. They refused to give any information or even confirm her enrollment. Through somewhat sly methods, I later learned she wasn't attending the college I had thought. Losing track of her left me feeling a bit sad, though it wasn't romantic love. Thinking about our past filled me with warmth and gratitude. We had positively influenced each other during those years. Perhaps that's why seeing Stella's transformation evoked feelings of frustration within me. The friend I once knew seemed to have disappeared. But 3 weeks later, after enjoying a hearty meal of pepperoni pizza and a beer, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened the door, to my surprise, Stella was there, adding complexity to my already hectic life. "Are you going to let me in?" she asked, her smile unwavering. After welcoming her into my apartment, she looked around and remarked somewhat sarcastically, "Nice place, Steve." I lived in a modest second-floor walk-up, a simple studio apartment that consisted of a single spacious room serving as a living area, dining space, and a small galley kitchen, with a bathroom accessible through a doorway. My focus was on pursuing a postgraduate degree, not on entertaining guests. So the setup suited me well. After working for 2 years following my bachelor's degree, I had saved enough funds to further my education. Being in the field of information and systems analysis allowed me to coordinate my work with my classes, working part-time for about 25 to 30 hours per week. It's a place for rest and study, which is all I really need. What brings you here, Stella? Wait, how did you find me? You're listed in the phone book. That's nonsense. The only phone I have is a cell. How did you find me? Stella paused, smiled, and replied, "It was clear you weren't going to reach out, so I did some digging. One of my acquaintances works in the registrar's office, and I had her search for your address. I'll ask again, why are you here? I wanted to meet and talk without the entourage, as you put it. Why? We haven't been close for the past 5 or 6 years. We were friends a long time ago when we were younger. I don't understand why you feel the need for a heart-to-heart with me. Do you remember that night at Kelly's when I mentioned I'd only had 2 serious relationships and felt like something was missing? When I saw you, I realized that what was missing was you. I began to comment on the absurdity of her statement, but she stopped me. Wait, let me finish, please, she requested. I mentioned wanting to change because of your departure, although I realized that's not exactly what happened. However, that was my initial motivation. As I delved into Project Stella, I started gaining confidence and soon realized you hadn't really left. You had just moved on to college as I had. Nonetheless, I continued working on self-improvement, spurred by the progress I was making. This is the end result. And now I'd like to reconnect with you. I interrupted her, asking, what are your intentions here, Stella? Perhaps we could go out a few times, maybe rekindle our friendship, and who knows, maybe it could evolve into something more. I'm not certain, but I do know I want to spend time with you. Why me? You clearly have plenty of options. Why choose me, Steve? You were the only guy who asked me out in high school. You didn't care about my weight, my lack of makeup, or my unconventional style. You were always kind to me. While I have no trouble finding dates now, they often focus solely on appearances, not on who I am. It would take a complete fool not to want to spend a few evenings with such an incredibly beautiful woman unless she had a terrible personality. I might not be the brightest person around, but I'm not foolish, and she hadn't shown any signs of being unpleasant to me, only to Kyle. What ultimately mattered to me was the friendship we shared in high school. If I could rediscover that same person beneath her beauty, this could be intriguing. I'd like us to be friends again, but I do have a few conditions, I said to Stella, such as now she was smiling. When we hang out or go on dates, I need to be your main focus, no entourage, no group of friends, just us. I worked hard and saved up for 2 years to come back to school for my master's degree, so I don't have much extra money. We won't be dining at any luxurious 5-star restaurants or extravagant places, I explained. Stella listened carefully, nodding in acknowledgement. Before she could reply, I added, one more thing, our time spent together will be limited, and I'm primarily focused on my studies. Not socializing, is that all she asked? Yeah, that's it. I realized I might seem strict setting these conditions, but I see my time as an investment, something I could spend on studying or extra work. I'd like to reconnect with the old friend I knew, but I'm unsure about this new version of Stella. If you're not up for it, I understand. May I pose a question? I nodded, and she inquired, would you be up for grabbing pizza tomorrow night? The following evening, we went out for pizza, marking the beginning of our attempt to reconnect. Stella and I engaged in typical friend activities, such as going on hikes, having picnics, attending free outdoor concerts, exploring the art museum, and simply getting reacquainted with each other. We had a great time and thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. On a couple of occasions, while at Kelly's or one of the other off-campus bars, we unexpectedly encountered Stella's circle of friends. It wasn't planned, and Stella suggested finding another place, but I decided to stay and join the group. I couldn't expect her to completely abandon her friends. I must admit, contrary to my initial reservations, I had a great time and found these individuals to be intriguing and a lot of fun. The first time we joined their group, Kyle immediately got up to fetch drinks for Her Majesty and her consort. I gently nudged him back into his seat and inquired if anyone else wanted another round. Kyle followed me to help carry the drinks back to the table. Kyle, what on earth are you doing? I understand you have feelings for Stella, but she'll never consider you as more than a friend if you continue to act like a love-struck puppy. Stand tall and assert yourself, I advised him. I couldn't help it. I loved seeing any guy being walked over. I'm not certain, but I believe he took my advice as I never saw him with the group again. On one of our off nights, I dropped by Kelly's for a burger and spotted Stella dancing with another man. Her entourage occupied a couple of tables near the dance floor. It wasn't a big deal we weren't exclusive, and I couldn't expect her to wait eagerly for my call at home. Nevertheless, I must confess, seeing her with another man unsettled me. I found myself contemplating Stella in a different light, considering her not just as a friend anymore. Perhaps it's time to evaluate where Stella and I stand. Maybe it's time to progress beyond mere companionship. However, committing to a full-fledged romantic relationship was the last thing on my mind, especially with my postgraduate degrees looming ahead. Perhaps it would be wise to scale back our friendship. On the other hand, I cherished our outings and didn't want to revert to a life consumed by studies and work. I was thoroughly perplexed. As Stella caught my eye at the end of their dance, she smiled and gestured for me to join her at her table. I waved back, smiled, and shook my head, finishing my beer. I wrapped up the burger to go and headed back to my apartment. Less than 30 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. Unexpectedly, it was Stella. Initially, she greeted me with a smile, but then her expression turned sour as she entered my apartment. "Why didn't you come over and join us?" she asked. "I thought you were on a date." "I didn't want to intrude," I replied. "That wasn't a date. He's just someone who started hanging out with us after Kyle left," she clarified. "Why didn't you join us? You've spent time with our group before." "So, Kyle finally left the group," I remarked, relieved to hear that he had taken a stand. "Yeah, it's odd. I hadn't seen him for weeks, then I bumped into him at a coffee shop. When I asked where he'd been, he said he was tired of playing the lover-struck puppy. He told me if I wanted to see him, I knew how to reach him, and then he walked away." Very strange behavior indeed. I couldn't help but chuckle. Kyle had essentially stood up to Stella, whom he referred to as Her Majesty. I admired his bravery. Stella noticed my smile and heard my laughter. "Did you play a role in Kyle leaving?" I simply pointed out to him that unless he stopped following your every command, you'd never truly respect him or consider dating him. "It seems like he got the message." She shook her head, smiling. "So what's the real reason you didn't join us?" I took a deep breath, held it for a moment, and then exhaled. It was time to be honest. I didn't like seeing you dance with another man. I know, I said preemptively before Stella could interject. "We're just supposed to be friends." Stella smiled again, took my hand and led me to the sofa, pulling me down beside her. "Continue," she encouraged. Drawing in another deep breath, I confessed, "We never discussed being exclusive. I mean, why would we? We're just friends and all. But I've realized I want more than that. Rather than cause any trouble, I decided to come home." She climbed onto my lap, murmuring, "I've been feeling the same way about us. I was waiting for you to make the next move, but I guess I'll have to do it." Then she kissed me. Thus began the next phase of our relationship, where we transitioned from simply hanging out to going on actual dates. We became exclusive, or going steady, as they say. Stella's circle of acquaintances transformed into genuine friends rather than mere followers, and she would spend evenings with them when I was busy with work or studies. Any male members of the group were promptly informed that Stella was off limits, so there was no point in pursuing her romantically. The dominance of Stella as the queen bee faded away, and we didn't miss that persona. Instead, I found myself with a partner who resembled the old Stella, and I was glad to have her back. We continued to spend time together until I completed my postgraduate studies. On the day of my graduation, I proposed to Stella, and she accepted. We opted for a spontaneous wedding in Las Vegas over a long weekend, and shortly afterward, I began my new job. In the initial 3 years of our marriage, everything went smoothly. We had thorough discussions about our expectations and desires as partners, reaching agreements on crucial aspects. We had already decided that discussions about having children, buying a house, and fidelity would come later. I expressed the importance of honesty, proposing that if either of us felt unhappy or dissatisfied with our marriage to the extent of seeking someone else, we should openly communicate instead of resorting to infidelity. We both acknowledged that it would be more respectful to address our concerns and part ways amicably, as we now had the time and financial means to indulge in activities we couldn't during my time in graduate school. We embarked on weekend getaways, humorously referring to them as mini honeymoons, fulfilling one of my long-standing desires. We flew to San Antonio one weekend to visit the Alamo and enjoy the Riverwalk. Another weekend, at Stella's request, we visited Hearst Castle. Throughout these experiences, we thoroughly enjoyed ourselves and nurtured our love for each other. At the onset of our 4th year of marriage, there was a shift in dynamics. Her Majesty Stella returned, exhibiting occasional signs of irritability towards me and issuing directives rather than requests. Initially I remained silent, but upon the third or fourth instance I confronted her about it. She attributed her behavior to workplace stress and apologized, promising to be more considerate. Despite briefly returning to her usual self, the pattern soon resumed, and after enduring this cycle for the third time, I reached my limit. "I'm uncertain about the cause of your distress, but whatever it is, it must be addressed," I stated firmly. "I refuse to be treated like one of your former subordinates. If there's an issue with me or our relationship, let's discuss it openly and resolve it." Stella apologized, shed some tears, and asked for forgiveness, which I granted. We reconciled that evening, yet I failed to probe deeper into the underlying issue and her unusual behavior. That night at Ools marked a turning point. Instead of being with her sister, as she claimed, she was caught in a passionate embrace with another man in a secluded booth. It was clear that this wasn't their first rendezvous. Whether their interactions had escalated beyond mere kissing was irrelevant. The moment she deceitfully lied, the moment she intimately engaged with him, the moment she secretly sought his company, our marriage ceased to exist. I had heard various reactions of husbands discovering infidelity. Some crumbled under the weight of betrayal. Some meticulously gathered evidence for divorce. Some devised elaborate schemes for revenge. And some resorted to violence against the adulterer, sometimes even the unfaithful wife. However, I chose none of these paths. My initial reaction upon seeing them together was disbelief, followed by a questioning of her motives, and ultimately anger. Stella was too shrewd and self-assured to fall for trivial advances. This man was clearly there at her invitation. While it was undoubtedly reprehensible for him to engage with a married woman, I couldn't entirely blame him after all. Stella was undeniably captivating. No, the bulk of my anger was reserved for my unfaithful wife. As I approached them, I wasn't particularly concerned about the man becoming physical. After all, I believed I had the moral high ground. The reason for my lack of concern was simple. I stand 6'A" with a solid physique. Might makes right. Isn't that what they say? My estranged wife and her companion didn't notice me until I settled into the seat opposite them. They abruptly stopped their intimate gestures. And if it weren't for the fact that it was my wife, the expressions on their faces would have been comical. I've heard the phrase about someone's face turning white with shock, but I had never witnessed it until now. Stella's mouth moved like a fish out of water, opening and closing in disbelief. It would have been amusing if it weren't Stella sitting there. "I didn't realize your sister underwent a sex change," Stella, I remarked solemnly. "Perhaps that's why her fiancé ended things with her." Stella's response was typical. She exclaimed, "Oh my God, what are you doing here? It's not what it looks like. It's not what you think," and so on. Her so-called friend thought it wise to make a swift exit from the booth, but I reached out and prevented him from leaving. "You'd better stick around, buddy. Stella will need a place to stay, and when I'm gone, you can take her with you." "No, I'll go home with you, Steve. We can talk and I can explain," Stella insisted. "Stella, you don't have a home anymore. You forfeited that the moment you got involved with this jerk. Don't bother coming home, don't call, and don't attempt to see me. My attorney will contact you at work to obtain your attorney's information, and we'll let them handle it," I responded. "Give me your wallet," I demanded from the man sitting across from me. He hesitated, so I warned, "Don't force me to take it from you after knocking you out. You're getting a free pass here because she invited you, so don't act foolish." Reluctantly, he handed me his wallet. I retrieved his driver's license and returned the wallet to him. "That's so I know who to subpoena if necessary, Jerry. Getting a replacement license shouldn't be too hard." I glanced at the pair and continued, "Stella, in this no-fault state we will simply divide everything evenly. If you want, you can keep the apartment. Don't drag this out, and it'll be resolved quickly." Good old Jerry started muttering something to Stella about his wife and family. "You two deserve each other," I remarked as I slid out of the booth. "Have a good night." I headed home to pack, ignoring the immediate ringing of my cell phone. Not tonight, Stella. Not tonight, I thought. If someone had observed me confronting Stella, they might have labeled me a cold-hearted jerk. They wouldn't have seen the pain of losing the girl from high school, rediscovering her, and then losing her again. On the journey home, I resolved not to fall into the trap some husbands in my position might succumb to. I wouldn't drown my sorrows in alcohol or indulge in self-pity. Those coping mechanisms only delayed the inevitable confrontation with one's problems. The only effective approach was to meet them face to face and address them properly. As I returned to our apartment, the phone was ringing, displaying Stella's sister's caller ID. Having somewhat composed myself, I picked up, assuming it was Stella, only to find it was Betty. "What's happening, Steve?" "Stella just arrived, and she's a wreck. She's crying and saying things she didn't mean," Betty exclaimed. "I caught your sister with her boyfriend tonight and ended things. I told her not to return home, so she must have come to your place," I explained. "Boyfriend? What boyfriend?" "Are you sure you saw correctly, Steve? There must be some misunderstanding," Betty questioned. "The misunderstanding lies with Stella. Let her know I'll be out of the apartment by tomorrow evening, and she can return then." "Goodbye, Betty," I stated firmly, ending the call abruptly. "Steve, wait," but I disconnected the call, muted the phone and the answering machine to avoid further interruptions. My cell phone began to ring incessantly, prompting me to power it off. I packed most of my belongings, including clothes and my computer, planning to stay at a motel for a few days until finding a new apartment. The following morning, I discovered roughly 12 messages on the answering machine and another 15 or 20 in my cell phone's voicemail. I briefly listened to each, recognizing they were either from Stella or Betty, before deleting them. The only call I returned was from my father. "What's happening, Steve?" he inquired when I phoned him. Stella called multiple times, either wanting to speak with you or asking me to reach out on her behalf. I found her with some guy in a bar, of all places, getting intimate. She didn't take it well when I suggested she shouldn't return home. Perhaps it was a mistake. Maybe nothing happened beyond that. Why not hear her out? "I'd hate to see your relationship end over this," Dad said. "Whether or not she slept with him doesn't change the fact that she deceived me to meet with him." "Still, you should give her a chance to explain, don't you think?" "All right, Dad. I'll talk to her just to get her off your back. But regardless of what she says, it's over between us," I affirmed. That afternoon, I dialed Betty's number and requested to speak with Stella. When she answered, she immediately launched into apologies, claiming she hadn't slept with him and that it didn't mean anything. But I cut her off. "Stella, listen to me. Stop crying and listen. When we got married, we agreed that if things went south, we'd part ways rather than disrespect each other. But for some reason, you chose not to honor that and became the epitome of a cliché, a cheating spouse. But Steve, I swear I didn't sleep with him. It was just harmless flirting. It didn't mean anything." "Stop." "It meant something to me, Stella. It showed a lack of respect for me, shattered my perception of your love for me, and signaled that it was time to end things. Please, let's meet and talk. I can explain everything and what really happened," Stella pleaded. "You're not listening. I don't care why you did it. I don't need to know what really happened. The lies and deceit are enough, and your infidelity is the final straw. Don't call me and stop bothering my dad. Just sign the papers when they arrive and let's make this as painless as possible." Goodbye, Stella. The divorce was finalized within a mere 3 months. Stella didn't resist or contest the division of assets, so it proceeded smoothly, although she requested a meeting with me prior to signing the papers. I declined, as there was nothing she could say or do to change my perspective on her actions. Following my departure from our apartment, I found a pleasant studio apartment on the first floor. Since it was just me, I wasn't looking for any commitments, so the size was adequate. I preferred to allocate my funds toward hobbies rather than a larger living space. I waited until my divorce was finalized before I began socializing or dating again. Oles and Kelly's ceased to be my preferred spots due to Stella, so I had to find a new hangout. I stumbled upon a place called Connor's Pub and Grill, which turned out to be ideal. They served quality drinks, offered good, simple food, and provided exceptional service. The atmosphere was welcoming and comfortable, making it a great place to unwind. I started going there for dinner on Friday nights. One of the owners, Jake Connor, struck up a rapport with me. He was a large man like myself, and we connected easily. I shared my story of woe, and he empathized, saying he'd been through similar experiences. Jake handed me a complimentary beer and shared some wisdom, noting that sometimes you have to navigate through life's challenges to find someone truly special. After approximately 6 months, I ultimately decided not to let my past with Stella hinder me from going wherever I pleased. Consequently, I frequented Kelly's with a few co-workers on occasion, and sometimes Stella would be there. Her entourage was fully restored, and this time she had 2 men catering to her every whim. Stella, in all her regal glory, had returned. Surprisingly, it didn't affect me much, but I relished the sight of her expression whenever I departed with another woman. One of these women was Julie Wilson, with whom I developed a pretty strong relationship after our first meeting at Kelly's. She got in touch every 2 or 3 weeks to schedule a date. Despite my previous confidence in my romantic skills, I found that compared to Julie, I was a novice and she was an expert. I noticed an odd pattern whenever Julie and I met up. She typically had to leave by midnight, but approximately every 6 weeks she would spend the entire night with me. I found it puzzling but didn't voice any complaints. Frankly, I'm not sure I could have handled her presence every night. As the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. This pleasant arrangement abruptly ended one evening as Julie was preparing to leave earlier than usual, around 9 p.m. I tried to persuade her to stay a little longer for another round. "I can't do it, honey. I have to meet Jack at 10:30 at the Lamplighter," she chuckled, stepping back from me. "I need to go home and freshen up before seeing him. Am I being replaced?" I teased. "Who's this Jack who's taking my place? Jack's my husband." Silly, then she noticed the surprised expression on my face. "I thought you knew I was married and we were just having some fun." "How would I know? You never mentioned a husband or anything," I replied, feeling more than a little upset. No wonder she wouldn't give me her phone number or tell me where she worked or lived. She didn't want me to disrupt her little adventures. "Oops, my mistake, but don't worry, honey, he'll be away on his trip next week, and I can spend the whole night with you." "I'll call you next week, baby," she said, leaning over to kiss my cheek. I felt like a jerk. I was doing to Jack what that jerk had done to me with Stella. Damn, I felt foolish and manipulated. Then, anger surged within me. Jack Wilson was likely a decent man, working hard to support his wife while she was being unfaithful. I knew I wasn't her only lover, but before I discovered she was married, I didn't care. It wasn't morality or principles or any lofty philosophy that drove me. It was pure rage, and I was determined that someone would finally face consequences. After a quick shower, I searched for the Lamplighter's address and headed out to find Jack Wilson. So here I am, sprawled on the barroom floor, pondering whether Jack Wilson is about to kick me. "Listen, Mr. Wilson Jack, I acknowledge that I owed you that one, perhaps even another. I'll stand up now, and if you deem it necessary, you can take another swing, but once that's done, I'll defend myself," I informed him. I rose, fully anticipating him to distract me again, but instead he stood before me, his eyes ablaze with hatred, gesturing towards the bar stools. We both took a seat. The bartender held the phone, presumably calling the cops, so I motioned for him to lower it, assuring him that everything was under control. Ordering 2 of Jack's drinks, I began recounting my tale. "I swear, Jack, I had no idea she was married until tonight. If I had known, I never would have gotten involved with her." He appeared skeptical, so I gave him a condensed version of Julie and me. I always felt she never faced consequences, but all I wanted was to get out. Revenge wasn't my thing. I could see in his eyes that he now believed me. "Here's my card. If you decide to divorce her or whatever, feel free to call me if you need me to testify or provide a statement for you." I offered. He nodded, slipping the card into his wallet. I signaled for another drink for him and rose to leave. "Before you decide, Jack, there's something else you should know. I'm not the only one. She contacts me every couple of weeks to meet up, and I don't think she's spending the rest of her time at home. Good luck, Jack, you deserve better than this." "Wait, Steve, would you stick around and confront her when she arrives? I'd like to see her face when she realizes you're here." I nodded and made my way to a secluded booth at the back, out of sight from Jack's position or the entrance. This should be amusing, or perhaps intriguing, I mused. About 10 minutes later, Julie breezed in. She approached Jack, exclaiming, "Hi, darling, I've missed you so much." After a hug and a kiss, she added, "Could you order me a drink, please? I need to use the restroom." Off she went. When she returned, Jack had relocated, and she took his seat facing away from my booth. After a few minutes, Jack gestured for me to come over. Approaching Julie from behind, I asked, "Hi, Julie, can I get you and your friend a drink?" She turned, caught sight of me, then glanced back at Jack before fainting. I exchanged a nod with Jack and departed. 3 months later, I received a call from Jack Wilson. He explained that he wanted to update me on what had transpired between him and Julie. According to Jack, he allowed Julie to persuade him into attending marriage counseling sessions, during which Julie consistently tried to shift the blame onto him for an entire month, twice a week. She complained about his frequent travels, claiming she felt lonely and so forth. Jack mentioned he realized it was a mistake when the therapist started siding with Julie. Fed up, he told them both off and initiated divorce proceedings. Apparently, Julie didn't want her actions exposed, so she didn't contest the divorce. Jack anticipated being officially divorced in another month or so. I reassured Jack, saying, "Don't let it get you down, you will get through this." As a friend once wisely said to me, life goes on. The key is to keep moving forward. 10 years on, I'm ready to share everything that has happened during this significant period of time. Let's start with the good news, as tradition dictates. Jack and I grew closer through shared struggles. Initially, we would gather to commiserate over our disappointments with our ex-partners over a pint at our favorite bar. As time passed and the pain subsided, we discovered we had many common interests and topics to discuss. We began to meet more often, and with each encounter, our friendship grew stronger. Today, I'm grateful to fate for giving me such a loyal friend who will always support me in difficult times. Additionally, he introduced me to his charming sister at his birthday party. That meeting turned my life upside down. Unlike my ex-wife Stella, Kate harbors no bitterness. She was the sweetest and kindest person I had ever met. We started dating, and within a couple of months I realized I couldn't imagine my life without Kate. She agreed to marry me, and we welcomed wonderful triplets into our lives. I was in shock, never once feeling distressed towards Kate. She never gave me any reason to doubt her. I tried to be the best husband for her, especially considering the threats from her older brother, who promised me trouble if I ever hurt her. So we've been living in love and harmony in our close-knit family for 10 years now, and I couldn't imagine a happier fate. When I think back on the reasons for our past misfortunes, it seems that karma finally caught up with them, though it didn't happen immediately. As they say, everything comes in its own time for those who know how to wait. As for my ex-wife, she continued to play the role of queen until she met a similar narcissist who turned out to be the father of her child. Despite lingering guilt, they decided to keep the pregnancy and start their own family. In this situation, Stella had to sacrifice much to please her narcissistic husband, including giving up friends and admirers, but she preferred this fate to being a single mother. At first, everything seemed fine, but Stella's pregnancy whims annoyed her husband, who began seeking solace elsewhere. Stella tried to resist his infidelity but faced his aggression and humiliations. Over time, she accepted her husband's affairs and learned to live with the mockery of those around her, as she was financially dependent on him. As for Julie, it seemed for a long time that fate was kind to her. Immediately after divorcing Jack, she married a wealthy older man but started seeking lovers on the side. One day, she made a fatal mistake by accidentally paying for a motel with her husband's credit card. As a result, he kicked her out, depriving her of everything dear to her. Trying to move in with her lover, she encountered misfortune on the road, ending up in the hospital. Am I glad about this outcome? It doesn't matter to me. I'm not vengeful, but once again I've realized that you can't play wicked games with fate, otherwise it will strike back, and it will hurt badly.